Welcome to Icebreakers for October. The purpose of these short video clips is really to get you sighted on certain issues that are happening out there that are very relevant to the world of AML, due diligence, etc. I tend to look at 3 stories per month, and this month I'm going to talk about briefly the Harrods data breach, cartel partnerships, and what's going on in South Africa. And if you operate over there, then you need to be aware of some of the issues around bribery, corruption and other risks that are cropping up. So Harrods have had a data breach. They report that some customer names, details have been accessed. Now, as always seems to be the case, it's a third-party vendor, that it was their system that was breached. Passwords were not part of the breach, nor payment details, but it would appear to be that names and contact details, presumably emails, telephone numbers and the like, they have got them. Thankfully, the 4 people have been arrested. That doesn't necessarily mean that the data isn't still at risk. It could have been sold on, it could be available on the dark web, etc. And as you're probably aware, there are other stores, retail providers that have been targeted of late, including Marks and Spencer's and the Co-op. So it continues to be a risk for all businesses, and you really need to get your cyber security risk assessed at the very least. Okay. So some learning points out of that. Never assume there's a limit on the breach impact. You just don't know how far these people are going to get into your systems. So always assume the worst, and you think about the what ifs. Where companies often fall down is they fail to take the third party provider in as part of the risk assessment. So they assume that the company they're working with has the same levels of security as them, but that's not always the case, and this happens time and time again. Another thing is you've really got to keep on top of your cyber. It's not a one-time thing. Things change all the time. There are different threats that are popping up, and you need to be continually monitoring for. I think so. Keeping on top of news, for example. What are the threats right now? What's the favoured one? And most of the time, to be fair, it's phishing. Phishing is the major, what they like to call, threat vector. If you can get on top of that, then you're going to lower your risk considerably. Cartel partnerships. FinCEN warning, and they warned back in August actually, of an alliance between Mexican cartels and Chinese money laundering networks, because the Mexicans want to move US dollar proceeds out of their country, and Chinese nationals want access to foreign currency. So the Chinese are acting as intermediaries. And it illustrates the collaboration of organised crime networks. And again, keeping on top of this, keeping sighted on this sort of thing will keep your organisation safer. And there's some massive figures there. So they say between 2020 and 2024, $312 billion in suspicious activity was tied into these networks. Now that is a massive network of problems for anybody working in AML compliance. So again, keep yourself sighted on this sort of thing. So some of the learning points. If you are operating in multi-jurisdictions, you've got to look out for the cross-border interaction between your clients, your customers, the businesses you're working with, and be aware that organised criminals are not stupid. They know where there are gaps in global regulation. They're watching all the time, and they will look for weaknesses like any criminal does. If someone's going to break into your house, they look for properties that don't have a good level of security. Same thing with businesses. Now, looking for patterns is really important. Analysis, and it's really looking at the data collectively and see where the spikes are. Patterns will tell you an awful lot, and that's where the analysis comes into things. So just because there's a rapid transfer of money doesn't necessarily mean there's criminal involved, but if it's happening regularly in one particular location or between certain businesses, you need to look at that a little bit more in detail. And moving beyond tick box compliance and due diligence is really, really important. Make sure you're checking source of funds, and make sure you have a path of escalation. And for me, this is about prioritising properly. So initial screening to identify the risks, then escalating as and when necessary. Something which we do really well in Investigation Engine, by the way. South Africa has been problematic for a while, but there's been a study by Professor Duvenage and some others apparently, which their claim in South Africa is now a mafia state, where politicians and organised criminals are intertwined with each other. So lots of allegations, apparently investigations are being interfered with and suppressed. There's collusion between those parties, and I don't think it's a surprise to say there's been political interference in the criminal justice system. That has been going on for some time. And the state is unable or completely unwilling to prosecute, which only leads to criminals get away with more. But that has to create a risk for any business operating with or in or within South Africa. So just some learning points there. So if you operate in South Africa, and I've no doubt that some of you listening to this do, you need to be, again, up on point with your due diligence, making sure you're assessing jurisdictional risk, making sure you've got alerts in place. Again, because of those allegations, you really need to be looking at political exposure. And in all fairness, there is no one single database for PEPs. You need to be sort of delving quite deeply into how people are associated, and that is where due diligence comes into play and enhanced due diligence. Joining the dots. And there's a couple of commissions. One is Madlanga and the other one is Zondo. So there's no reason why you can't put a news alert using Google into that and receive regular updates, or just check in on the website. So the other suggestion is making sure that your contracts allow for the rights of audit, so you can actually ask questions. There's transparency, and making sure you have a risk assessment model in place, and knowing when to escalate as and when necessary, or being able to exit where corruption has reached a point where you cannot physically operate there without creating adverse media or problems for yourself. So hope they found that helpful this month. As always, questions, comments, suggestions, feel free to email me, and look out for November's issue. Thank you for listening.